welcome to week 5. This week we are going to talk about a huge achievement in animation film history, and that is color. Let's just dive on in. So, I want you to know, in the 1930s there were several animation studios, and I'm just not able to cover all of them and all of the key players. So do a little research to see what else was going on at the time. Worldwide, animation was happening all over. I am going to cover a couple different competitors, but again, check out what's out there. All right, so you remember Mr. Iwerks, right? He departed from Disney in the early 1930s, and he was able to find personal success with Flip the Frog. So here is Fiddlesticks from 1930. And notice what's different. It is not in black and white. Flip the Frog, a color and sound cartoon by Iwerks, Cinephone. All right, so color was a game changer. Again, now this Flip the Frog was only using two colors. Okay, so take note, two colors. These were either red and blue or red and green. Now, there's a system that will come with three colors, which we'll get to in a second, but the two color system was used at first. This is still technically a part of Technicolor, which is a three-color process that really became a game changer. But the thing is, Technicolor came around to a bunch of different studios and said, hey, we've got this new system. It's going to be really popular. It was also very expensive, though. So they came, to Disney. They came to Fleischer. They came to MGM, all these different studios. And originally, Max Fleischer turned them down. Now, Disney at the time did not have a lot of money. They were kind of struggling financially. They had a lot of layoffs. But he was denied, Max Fleischer and his brother Dave, were denied the opportunity to use Technicolor because Paramount had bankruptcies. And so Technicolor didn't think that they could financially afford it and keep up with the payments. So they ended up exclusively signing to Disney. So the Fleischer brothers and other companies had to stick with this two-color process while Disney had full rights to the three. It didn't end too badly for them, though. Eventually, the Disney contract ended. But here's another two-color process, and this is Betty Boop. So you can really see the red and blue here, two-color process. Max Fleischer presents Betty Boop for Cinderella. A Cinecolor process, again, only the two colors, directed by Dave. You can really, if you're ever confused, we can see red and blue here visibly. Two-color process. Technicolor is three.
Just a poor Cinderella. Nobody loves me, it seems. And like a poor Cinderella, I find my romance in dreams. For that's where I meet my Prince Charming. When I'm with him, cares fade away. I'm just a poor Cinderella, but I'll be a princess someday. Can't you see that we are rushing? Hurry up, go get my bus. You're too slow, I don't feel hot. I hope you enjoyed the ball. Nobody loves me.
Cinderella, pretty Cinderella, you're unhappy, I can see. I'm your fairy godmother, listen to me. Dry your little eyes, there is no need to cry at all. You're so kind and gentle, you'll go to the ball. Go fetch me a pumpkin, a large one, my dear, 6 mice and 2 lizards, and bring them right here.
Oh, here they are. Oh. Oh. Here they are.
You can never be half as happy as we. I'm so overjoyed to be with you, and this is why I was almost cut up for pumpkin pie. Lady?
Remember, when the clock strikes 12, you must be home by then. For should you fail to be in bed, you'll be in rags again. Remember, remember.
For that's where I meet my Prince Charming. When I'm with him, can't fade away.
They call the poor Cinderella.
But I'll be a princess someday.
Of course, an ad partway through.
Squarespace has been pivotal in allowing
Hail, a prince! Silence! Who was that beautiful maiden? Have you no tongues? And I, the prince, do now declare, whosoever this slipper can wear, my throne will share.
For that's where I met my Prince Charming.
When I'm with you, cares fade away.
I'm just a poor Cinderella, but I'll be a princess someday.
Now you see, it's all your
My fault, you impudent thing.
Oh, shut up, you jester!
How dare you? For 2 pence, I'd slap your face.
Oh, you will, will you?
Yes, I will. What are you going to do about it?
I don't know how to get these off. Let me just rewind. So again, you can see this is a Paramount Color Classic. So just to reiterate, Technicolor came to the Fleischer Brothers and Paramount, but Paramount had experienced a lot of bankruptcy issues, and so Technicolor didn't think it was a good fit. So the Paramount Color Classic is this 2-color. It's interesting, you know, when you're watching it, do you find that is it off-putting that it's only 2 colors? Do you kind of forget that it's in 2 colors and get sucked into the story? At the time, don't forget, people had only been seeing black and white, so this was pretty amazing. I've got a couple of links here for you to read. So Fiddlesticks flip in first color cartoon. Okay, so they made a very good tongue twister. This, I think, is just interesting to look through and read just about Flip the Frog and Fiddlesticks. It was a nice look at it. And then just 2-color cartoons, just a look into that. A pretty short read for you. Then 3-color, Technicolor. Technicolor is probably the biggest addition to animation. And again, by 1936, Disney's exclusivity had expired. So they had it for a few years and then it expired. Technicolor began with film, and then they approached different animation studios. Still, the red and green is what started, then they realized, okay, if we add that third color, look at all of the color that we can get. And I wanted you guys to see this process film.
The Technicolor Dye Transfer, or imbibition printing process, was introduced in 1926. It had been in development for almost 8 years and was seen as a replacement for the problematic cemented printing technique. It was largely invented by Daniel F. Comstock, who was one of the founders of Technicolor. The dye transfer process became one of Technicolor's greatest legacies and remained in continuous use for almost 50 years until the mid-1970s. At its simplest, the dye transfer process meant transferring a dye image onto another carrier. In Technicolor's case, this meant transferring multiple color records, one by one, onto a blank piece of film. This may sound simple in principle, but it was actually very complicated and took millions of dollars of experimentation to perfect. The Technicolor dye transfer printing process started with a blank piece of film and then pressed the dyes on with a matrix relief, one color at a time. The full spectrum could be reproduced by combining cyan, yellow, and magenta dyes. It took 2 minutes for each of these dyes to transfer from the matrix film to the blank film, so the whole operation had to be kept constantly moving in order to handle the huge quantities of film. To do this, the matrix and the blank were held together tightly on a long strip of metal, 35 millimeters wide, with pins or teeth along its edges. This was called a pin belt. It was originally 240 feet long and was joined in a loop. This, of course, took up a lot of space, so in Technicolor's lab, it was spread through several rooms. The constantly moving film path would go through holes in the wall and holes in the floor and ceiling. One of the crucial parts of this printing process was the point where these three components combined: the matrix, the blank, and the pin belt. It was called the roll tank. The dyed matrix was pressed into contact with the blank while passing through a series of rollers. After travelling along this loop, the matrix would separate from the pin belt while it was still moving, and the next dye layer would be added in a second pass. Technicolor prints were inherently a little soft. They weren't as sharp as black and white prints. This was because the dyes had to transfer into the blank film, and they spread a little bit. To maintain a level of sharpness during the early days of 3-color printing, Technicolor applied a key image underneath the dyes. The key image was actually a light or soft black and white image printed on the film. Each dye was then printed on top of this, one by one, as normal. This enhanced the definition and the contrast. Technicolor's imbibition technology was used in the United States until 1975, in Britain until 1978, and in Italy until around 1980. Despite the superior quality and cost savings when making large quantities of prints, Technicolor struggled to maintain the process with competition from Kodak's Eastman Color and other rival processes. Technicolor's imbibition technology is now considered obsolete. The equipment was deinstalled years ago. It has been dismantled and dispersed. It can't be reconstructed again, at least not without huge investment. Because of this, Technicolor prints are now irreplaceable. They cannot be recreated. The technology is effectively extinct. Another benefit of Technicolor is that the prints don't fade. When compared to other companies' color processes, which became notorious for fading to pink or magenta over time, Technicolor prints have held their vibrancy to this day. For this reason, they are valuable documents of what audiences originally saw, and are frequently consulted for film restorations. You could compare these prints to original artworks in museums and galleries. To truly understand and appreciate the beauty of this process, you have to experience it in person.
So, I think it was just a cool little video to kind of give you a little bit more insight to what actually goes into the process. It is a very labor-intensive process. And then I have a couple more sites. I really just wanted to push home the idea of Technicolor, how important it was in history. And yeah, you've definitely probably seen Technicolor. There are a couple videos of Technicolor in cinema. It's the process is used to produce color in motion pictures. Today, Technicolor is perhaps more known for the end result of the coloring process than the process itself. Their Technicolor films are known for their bright, bold, saturated colors. So you can feel free to take a look at this. There's a little Snow White. You know, we already looked at Snow White, but knowing that it's in color.
Walt Disney's first feature-length film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The film is a technical marvel, the first feature-length cell animation that utilised both colour and sound, and it was the film upon which Disney built his empire. But why was Walt able to do what so many people thought was impossible? And what is it that makes Snow White so timeless? This is the story of Walt's first masterpiece. Hello and welcome to 100 Years of Cinema. We'll be taking a look at least one film each year from 1915 onwards to track the evolution of film over the last transferred to transparent cells, then coloured and composited into 350,000 frames that ran for over an hour and 20 minutes. With this, Walt changed the game when it came to animation. The film's worldwide gross totaled $6.5 million by 1939. Even today, it's still the highest performing animated film ever made. It earned Walt an Academy Award and secured him the funding to go on and build the greatest animation empire the world had ever seen. So what made Snow White so successful? It wasn't the first feature-length animation committed to film. Filmmakers had been creating feature-length cartoons since at least 1917, with the earliest surviving from 1926. Nor was it the first colour cartoon or the first with synchronized sound.
Follow the ball and join in, everybody.
But it was a huge leap in the quality, technology, and story capabilities of animation. This is a cartoon from 1935, and this is Snow White just 2 years later. According to legend, the idea to create Snow White dates back 18 years before production started, when a 15-year-old Walt Disney saw a silent version of Snow White in 1916.
The thing I remembered as a kid, I saw Marguerite Clark in it in Kansas City one time when I was a newsboy. They had a big showing for all the newsboys, and I went and saw Snow White. It was probably one of my first big feature pictures I'd ever seen.
The idea had been developing and growing until one night in 1934, Walt gathered his animators and recited for them an early version of the story that would eventually become Snow White, along with the characters and their personalities. People doubted that the audience could sit through more than an hour's worth of cartoons without getting headaches or becoming bored. But what Walt realised was that in order to keep the audience engaged, they would need an emotional connection to the film that early cartoons were unable to produce. The emotional gap between the audience and the cartoon characters needed to be bridged, and in order to do this, Walt needed to imbue Snow White with a sense of realism, giving the audience the feeling that this was all happening to a real person who could think and feel, allowing them to empathise with Snow White and the dwarfs, all while retaining the charm and whimsy that comes from the unreal nature of animation. Almost every choice made in the production of the film was pointed towards striking this balance, from the writing and direction, to the character animations and designs, to the music and Foley effects.
To age my voice, an old hag's cackle.
All designed to carefully tread the line between the realistic and the fantastic. You can see this pull towards realism in the evolution of the characters' designs. When the film first started development in 1934, the characters were very similar to what you might see in a Silly Symphonies cartoon. But as production moved forward, Disney artists settled on a much more naturalistic representation of Snow White, one that emphasized her innocence and purity, but at the same time resembled a real human being, playing down the caricature style that was common in early cartoons. This push towards realism went beyond just the characters' designs. Walt hired actors to create live-action sequences from the films, and the footage was either directly rotoscoped or used as reference to guide the animators. During production, Walt had his animators attend life drawing classes to better develop the skills of capturing movement, and the result was incredibly lifelike animation. Compare the Merry Dwarfs from Disney Studios in 1929 to the dwarves in Snow White. Their movement has personality that gives you insight into their characters. It carries weight and it feels natural. And because of this, you can see the dwarves as individuals, almost alive. You can empathize with them as they pull you through the story. You feel their surprise at finding Snow White in their bed, their love for her innocence, their fear for her safety,
The Queen! Snow White! The Queen will kill her!
their heartbreak at her death, and finally joy at her happily ever after. The same is true when you see Snow White running with panic through the woods. You can feel the fear by looking at her movement alone, unlike fear depicted in some earlier cartoons. This naturalistic movement wouldn't be quite as effective if it wasn't taking place in a real feeling world. Compare the animals, trees, and environments from earlier silly symphonies to those in Snow White. Locations such as the castle or the dwarf's cottage was designed to be a reflection of early European fairy tale illustration, exaggerated and whimsical, but at the same time not so unreal that you couldn't picture yourself there. To build on this feeling of being in a real world, Walt had his technicians devise ways of mimicking film techniques and camera movements that were common in live-action films. Once again, this served to further eliminate the barrier between the cartoon and the real world. To do this, engineers at the Disney Company created an entirely new way to photograph animation: the multiplane camera. Principally, it operated the same way as traditional animation. Individual cells were stacked, photographed, and then moved slightly to produce the illusion of movement. But it had one key difference. Instead of cells being laid flat on top of each other, each one was suspended individually, allowing animators to control the depth, speed, and movement of up to 7 individual layers. Disney first experimented with the multiplane camera in the Silly Symphonies cartoon, The Old Mill. It was used very simply, and it gave the animation an almost 3D quality. Snow White, however, pushed the limit of what the multiplane was capable of. By moving layers in different directions, animators created the illusion of a whirling vortex for the Queen's transformation. This new depth, made possible by the multiplane camera, also allowed for a new leap in the direction of cartoons. For the first time, animators could realistically simulate camera movement and the placement of camera as if it was truly located within the world of Snow White. Instead of the flat, front-facing perspective of cartoons, the viewer could now move through the trees. It could take on the perspective of an animal looking up from the ground, or of Snow White as she gazes down at her own reflection in the bottom of a well. All of this goes to solidify the physicality of the world of Snow White and further give you the impression that the events happening have real-world consequences. Once Walt had nailed down the reality of the characters and the world, the final step was to make the film sound like a real place. It's no surprise that Walt focused his attention on sound. After all, he did create one of the world's first synchronized sound cartoons in 1928 with Steamboat Willie. But it was sound effect pioneer Jimmy MacDonald who really brought the sounds of Snow White to life. Jimmy had joined Disney in 1934 and cut his teeth creating sound effects for early Mickey Mouse cartoons. And where he used sound to punctuate a joke in his early cartoons, in Snow White he used them to create an immersive environment, building on the physicality of objects in the world.
You know, you need an empty wallet, and I had no trouble with that. I had lots of these. But they'd walk like this.
This added element of lifelike sound is the final ingredient in creating the illusion of a real world. And when you add all these together, you get an almost perfect vehicle for exploring characters' emotional depth. You're drawn in by the charms of this Germanic fantasy world, but at every turn, you're confronted with panic, joy, optimism, jealousy, and every other emotion. Here's how Variety described it a week after the film's premiere. So perfect is the illusion, so tender the romance and the fantasy, so emotional are certain portions when the acting of the characters strikes a depth comparable to the sincerity of human players, that the film approaches real greatness. Of all the innovations that Disney has brought animation, this is the one that changed everything. The emotional response to these stories is why the audience can sit down for over an hour and become completely absorbed in a magical world. Because no matter how fantastic, how beautiful, and how out of this world a cartoon, Disney grounded it to the same reality that affects you and me. So if you felt emotionally affected by Up, The Brave Little Toaster, or Toy Story 3, you can thank Walt for animation that reflects the real world and for giving us the cartoons that we can connect to. Hey, thanks for watching.
So really great look at just history and what Disney had done and what color can do and what building emotions and relationships and characters can do. So then I have posted another article just for you to look at, the red filter or the blue-green filter for the two-color Technicolor system, or the two-color system, and then an article on how Walt, kind of what the movie or the short we just watched went over. Your little giveaway for this quiz. Today my magic answer is purple. And then we have Disney. So I've got Mickey's Firefighters here, just a good short. I would highly recommend that you take a look at it. And then along a similar line, in 35 we have Technicolor and then the Fire Brigade, which involves more characters. So let's take a look. Walt Disney, Mickey Mouse in Technicolor. How vibrant and bright the colors are, how they really took advantage of the whole spectrum of colors that they had. And you know that from other Disney things. So what was going on around the same time and Disney's biggest competitors? So Disney created the market for color cartoons and other producers followed. So Gulliver's Travels, this is 1939. This is a Max Fleischer, let me close this so you can see, produced by Max Fleischer. So the Fleischer brothers, Max in particular, really wanted to compete with Disney. They thought they had it, they thought they could do it better, and so in the earlier 1930s, around 1934, they realized that they were a big enough studio that they could undertake a feature film. Paramount actually discouraged Fleischer's plans, but he was making larger production Popeye cartoons at the time, and then they realized that maybe he had something going for him then. Walt Disney's Snow White was such a success in the box office, and Paramount wanted one for a Christmas release. So they thought about different concepts, different stories that could be good. They thought about doing like a Peter Pan, but then they decided on Gulliver's Travels. So here the whole film is on here if you want to watch it. We're going to take a look at a small part and see what you think. Like, is this look like Disney? Does it look like, let me pause this. Does this look like Disney? Does it look like a Fleischer brother cartoon? Look at the color.
Exquisite taste. Exquisite.
Roses, precious, rhododendrons, ranunculus, snapdragons, und daisies. Pretty posies, aren't they?
Beautiful blooms. Beautiful.
So I'm going to fast forward a little bit. Gulliver was rotoscoped. I'm guessing you can kind of tell.
If you want to ace your...
Of course, a commercial. So this movie, Gulliver's Travels, was the second real full-length feature animated film. And of course, it's the first one that wasn't done by Disney.
It's a happy day, toodaloo-lay, for you and me, for us, all the class have a fun.
All right, and again, you can watch more at your own time. But I do want to note that Gulliver's Travels actually did not make any money. It lost a lot. The war had begun in Europe about 2 months before its release date, and they were $500,000 in the red after making this film. So the big gamble that Disney took and paid off timing-wise really hurt the Fleischer brothers and Paramount. So Harmon and Ising moved from Warner Brothers, remember those two, to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer MGM Studios. So MGM, now trying to become one of the big studios, came up with Happy Harmonies, which was their version to compete with Silly Symphonies and Looney Tunes. So MGM, Happy Harmonies, Hugh and Rudolph cartoon. So they're still working together, they're just transferring to a different studio.
There was a fairy princess, so beautiful and charming. And she was locked up in a great big castle that a nasty old dragon was guarding. And this dragon, he sat by the castle door, and there he sat and he'd roar, such an awful, awful, ferocious roar that it even scared all the knights of yore. And the princess still waits for her hero, and sighs, and the poor little thing just cries and cries and cries and cries.
perfect sea. All the kids are scared of me. Taters and spinach ain't my lunch. I eat ragdolls, I love mice. Beware! Beware! I'm the calico dragon. I guard my castle night and day. I eat all that comes my way. A dog, a horse, a knife or two. Or better still, I might eat you. I'm the calico dragon.
All right. So, as you can tell, Happy Harmonies are very like lavish, cutesy. They had color. There were animated shadows and reflections and details in the backgrounds, which you hadn't seen a lot of that up to this point. So it was a really good, kind of idea and cartoon and series. But then Harman and Ising's contract expired in 1937, and MGM decided not to renew it. They wanted to try to save money. Of course, money always becomes the main issue. So I wanted to take a look at some other styles of animations, things that were happening at this time. So Oscar Fischinger is the pioneer of abstract animation. He got his start actually with a cigarette commercial where he animated the cigarettes in a stop motion style. And from that, he got money, obviously, and this is not even going to pronounce it, but basically Marathi marches on, and Marathi was the cigarette company. Apologize if I'm not saying it correctly, but 1934, he made money on that commercial and then was able to create one of his most famous pieces, which is Composition in Blue.
The thing that's different about a Verbo vacation home, you always have the whole place to yourself.
For those that don't know, I guess I should also summarize. Stop motion animation is when, for this case, they're physical objects, and you take a picture of it, and then you move the object a little bit, take a picture of it. There was a lot of replacement animation in here where, let's say, he had a block of one size and then he would replace it with one of another size, and so it would look like it was growing or shrinking because they were replacing the parts. So here's an excerpt. It's a little hard to find online. Okay, so you can see using replacement animation, really finding the balance of stop motion with movement and music. I also posted a link to this Optical Poem. It's a really another interesting one to take a look at. I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. This one involves shapes and the whole, Oscar really liked blue, so the first one was kind of all the stuff taking place in a blue room. Then he did a series called Studies, where he was just kind of studying color, sound, and stop motion. And then we have George Powell, who created Puppet Tunes. So again, like another stop motion idea. George Powell kind of gave in or helped to improve fantasy films, and he used puppets, and he ended up calling them Puppet Tunes. He was born in Hungary, and he was going to be an architect, but he ended up taking illustration classes and never looked back. He ended up doing some animated commercials in Czechoslovakia, and again, that got him money to kind of grow his Puppet Tunes. And he kind of pioneered his own form of animation, again, using these puppets. And again, replacement animation. So that's something that you're going to want to know. And it's where we can take a doll and replace their head so they have a different emotion or something like that. This is still used. Coraline and all of the, I believe it's called Latika, the Tim Burton Nightmare Before Christmas, Fantastic Fox, all of those kind of use the same thing. So let's just take a little look at Puppet Tunes. Sorry, I just want to make sure. 1938, George Powell, Technicolor.
She wore a little jacket of blue. She get that little jacket of blue. And all the sailors knew just why she wore a jacket of blue. She has the leaf that fell from the tree. She has the breeze that came from the sea. Where can my lover be? I won't you send him over to me? And everybody's wailing, but she would say to every sailor, tell me true, where is my boy in blue? Tell me true, tell me what I can do. The truth they never told her, but they tried their best to console her, day by day, until she wasted away. Day by day, till she wasted away. She got a little jacket of blue. She get a little jacket of blue. And all the sailors knew, that's why she wore a jacket of blue.
I saw the harbor lights. They only told me we were parting. The same old harbor lights that once brought you to me. I watched the harbor lights. How could I help if tears were starting? Goodbye to
tender nights beside the silvery sea. I long to hold you dear and kiss you just once more. But you were on the ship and I was on the shore. Now I know lonely nights, all the while my heart is whispering. Some of the harbor lights will steal your love from me. And the melody's hot. Yeah, the rhythm's okay in Harlem, 'cause what it takes they've got. The rhythm's okay in Harlem if you wanna go gay. Yeah, the rhythm's okay in Harlem, 'cause Harlem's built that way. High yellow, dark brown fellas trucking with their light up loud. Sightseers go to stare, society has its breakfast there. The rhythm's okay in Harlem and they swing it along. Yeah, the rhythm's okay in Harlem, 'cause rhythm's Harlem's song. Hear those brass men play it. The rhythm in Harlem's heart. Hear those saxes sway it. Rhythm in Harlem's heart. Oh, fellas, those high yellows, taking their feet to town. No, baby, don't be maybe. Picking them up and just laying them down. Once that music gets you, cause the rhythm in Harlem's hot. All the rhythm's okay in Harlem, and you swing it along. All the rhythm's okay in Harlem, for rhythm on song.
All right, so definitely a new style, very interesting, and techniques that are used today. And then I want to also just look at Soviet animation. So the new Gulliver was 1935. It was done by Alexander Petrushka. And this appears to be the first ever film where they mix live action and stop motion animation. See if I can get this to play. So that was live action. Here is the animation section. And of course we get an ad. You can watch this on your own. It is a really interesting technique, and I mean, think about it. I mean, Space Jam was like a combination of 3D animation and live action, but New Gulliver did it in 1935. I have a graffiti animation here. I just really want to get you guys used to looking at different styles of animation and what's out there, what could be done, what should be done. So here's a quick clip. And again, I recommend you watch the whole thing. So take a look. Now, we're talking about color a lot and how color kind of changed the game. One example, I don't know if you guys have seen the movie or not, but I like to look at Corpse Bride. which is another stop motion animation. I'm tying it all together here. Corpse Bride does a really interesting job with color theory. When people are alive, it is a gray world. And people, when they are dead, it is a colorful, vibrant world. And so you kind of think it's the opposite, like, wait, if they're living, they should be lively and full of color. But here is the...
Prophets with Her Highness. We'll be there, we'll be seen, having tea with the Queen. We'll forget everything that we've ever been.
Okay. And then here is one where we have the two kind of mixing, so alive and dead. And take note about the color in the background as well. And again, you can watch all of these. I'm just trying to show you a clip. I know this video is getting a little longer. But also look at just the animation style and look how it's different and similar than what we looked at earlier. Okay, so I want you to think about color theory. If you haven't taken a class where you talk about color theory, I really want you to look at some of these articles. There's also the color psychology. This last one is, what do colors mean to us? When we see red, what does it signify? You know, generally red is passionate, it is fiery, it is fast, it is, you know, one of the most intense colors. So how can we use that? Or, you know, green, jealousy, or earthy, or purple being royalty. So take a look at color theory. I've posted kind of some sites that are interesting and go over it, I think, pretty successfully. Again, saying how to use it in design as well as what it kind of signifies. And then lighting and color in animation and films. I think this is really a cool site to look through, so take your time going through this and paying attention to the colors that are used. And then lastly, the power of color in animation. You know, when we remove kind of the details and just look at a color script, saturation and value, and it goes on and on. Really interesting and cool stuff though. And then I want you to use it in our discussion for this week. So think about how color is used today. Find a clip from a movie, short, commercial, or game. Just make sure it's animated. Explain the color palette that they used and why you think they used that color scheme. Look into the meaning of the colors and the character's personality. Make sure you post the clip as well. And then respond to a minimum of 2 of your classmates' posts discussing other theories that you may think behind the colors. And then I want you to pick a different color scheme that you think would work and explain why it would work. You know, they use purple here, but I actually think green would fit better with whatever family, you know, whatever it is, you know. Make your initial post by Thursday and your response post by Sunday. Okay? And then you have a quiz this week and then you are set. So I know this week was a little bit more technical, talking about actually what goes into Technicolor, what goes into color theory. Let me know if you have any questions along the way, and I will talk to you soon.